And this Hangout on Air is live. Good morning and welcome to Scary Bookkeeping Stories. It's Halloween 2014. Woohoo!
Having too much fun here.
Everyone's got their costumes on.
Who says accountants are boring?
That's
Yeah. For real. Ooh, Linda's joining us. All right.
Hey, Linda.
Oh, hey, I love that costume there.
Linda, where's your costume? Come on.
Yeah, where's yours?
Cool effects.
Let's see.
Oh.
Click on the effects and pick one. Don't do the dog. That's like... It's scary.
Oh, we're supposed to pick something off of the little...
The Google effects.
That you want. Joanne is live and in person. I just love that wig. Love it, love it, love it.
Oh, there's more screens. Oh, there's more stuff.
It's not even Google effects. It's
I'm going as Elsa the Ice Queen. My little Sierra up here and
Well, you got the background going.
Looks like money. Oh, it sounds.
oh, Seth and I were earlier cha-chinging and applauding at the same time. That really went cool.
Let's see now.
And...
Oh, here we go.
That's great.
I'll be the cat in the hat.
Okay.
It follows your head. Did you see that?
I know.
Bounced up and down again. That was cool.
My halos. Isn't a halo appropriate for me?
Oh, yeah.
What's the clicking?
That's TikTok. We got sound effects, too.
Yeah, people log in.
I think we can get a lot done today.
Now, since this is an accounting hangout, this is the most appropriate sound effect.
It's better with cha-ching and applause.
Right.
Alright, we have to
Alright,
sounds
so we're talking scary bookkeeping stories today.
Dennis, you're in twice.
He's got it fixed. He fixed it.
Okay.
And
I
we're
got to turn on
tweeting with the hashtag SOBSMB, School of Bookkeeping. So tweet us there, pound SOBSMB.
Seth, every time you turn your head, you look like you're drowning.
We're going rogue. Stop the insanity.
I'm going to put my halo.
This is perfect for scary bookkeeping stories.
It made me dizzy.
Accountants gone wild.
It's gone wild.
Don't
tell my mama.
Don't get those wet T-shirts.
This is accountants, bookkeepers, and business owners gone wild.
Man, I'm not sure that we're hearing you either. You may have audio issues.
Can you hear me now?
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yay! I love it.
I love my new hair.
Rhonda. Come on, Rhonda. Turn your camera on, Rhonda.
No pressure.
Maybe it's scary.
I got a shirt too.
Oh,
See my
Oh, don't scare me. Look at my halo.
Scary clown.
That's my scary
Don't
client.
corrupt the angel.
Best costume.
That is my scary client shirt.
That is actually one of your clients, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
You need
All right,
to be
well,
a little more
your
selective.
costume so they won't recognize that it's you talking about them.
That's right.
All right, so who's got a good story to share? Names withheld. I feel like I've already shared all mine because I share them all the time.
I know.
I've got an embarrassing QuickBooks consultation story, if you want to hear that. It's kind of
Embarrassing for them or you?
me. I had this consultation with this client, and he was doing online sales, and it was pretty apparent he didn't want to talk about the product he was selling. So first So finally, the curiosity got the better of me. I said, okay, what are you selling online? And he kind of mumbled something, and I'm getting kind of old, and I don't hear as well as I used to. But it sounded like he said pennies. And I said, you sell pennies over the internet? He says, oh, no, not pennies, panties.
Panties.
Panties. Apparently he had set up this company that was going to sell panties of the Pac-12, I guess, to people. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, right. I'm sure that the licensing and marketing departments of these colleges are going to want to have their logos stamped on women's underwear.
They are.
Yeah. So it was.
I'm sure they're stamped on everything.
I thought you were going to say something like adult toys.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Tim, because I was going to bring up a story based on Dennis's, where I had a client come to me and initially came in saying, I have online sales, and he didn't say what the product was, and it turned out to be exactly that. It turned out to be adult toys.
Nice.
I thought you were going to say they arrived in their panties.
Did you get a huge applause, Seth?
I don't know, but then I started, of course, me being me, I started asking him questions about some of the potentially interesting customer service calls he may have gotten.
I have a couple stories.
He did have some interesting stories to share, but I don't know if they'd be appropriate for this forum.
Yeah.
I
My
actually
husband
have a
came in
couple
with a product
stories.
one time from a client. I still have it on my desk.
Oh.
I hear it's pretty good.
Oh, wow. Energy drink.
But look at what kind of energy drink.
I
I
saw
don't
it.
know, but it's high calorie.
How many calories?
I probably shouldn't have it on my desk. I haven't even thought about that. That's pretty stupid.
So yesterday I actually met with a guy from Zero briefly, and he was telling me about somebody who has a bookkeeping business where they specialize in, the legal marijuana dispensaries, and the name of the business is something like Cannabooks.
I love it. That's awesome.
Well, and they're probably making a lot of money, too.
Different kinds of clients, too.
But they can't have bank accounts though, right?
Well, so I asked him, I said, do you think they get free samples?
Little bartering.
Probably they. Well, I don't know about the bookkeepers. Just the
And then
guys
if they
who grow
get
it.
free samples, Tim, they may not be making that much money because they may be too high to do the books properly.
Gotta
Oh.
watch that bartering. It's, it's
So-
reportable.
Seth, I have a story of the Intuit conference. When I was walking around looking at some of the vendor booths, I had moved over to the right, and there's this cart with people on it. They drive those little carts when they move people,
Yes.
like
What
in
do
the
you call
airport.
A golf cart?
A golf cart. And so I was like completely out of the way, and this thing said, "Can you please move over, sir?" And I'm like, rolled my eyes, turned back, and said, I wanted to say, WTF. Then I looked and it was Martha Stewart. I almost cussed out. I was like, I think I'm glad my tongue didn't finish that sentence.
Actually, it would have been better if it had.
She wanted a wide berth, huh?
That was funny. I
That's
thought Magic Johnson was really great. I
That
thought they all
was
were
awesome. I honestly don't know why they had Martha Stewart on there. Everything I've ever heard about her has been negative in terms of her just not being a nice person, not treating people well.
But what was she talking about? Business advice or?
her jail sentence.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Did they ask her about her stock transactions?
Well, Juliana Rancic interviewed her, and she kept it very general, but she clearly opened the door by asking about how she, quote-unquote, overcomes challenges, in the midst of her success. So, of course, and that's where it started to actually get interesting. Up until that point, I was bored out of my mind with her. And then she started to say, well, there was this 10-month period in my life where, and then she started talking about it, and she was actually kind of funny there because she said, that as she was, I guess, getting ready to go do her sentence, people were telling her, oh, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger, and she said her response to that, and she spelled it out just like this, she says, is F-U-C-K-U, or something like that. And so that's where, and you're so shocked to hear that come out of her mouth, although at that point,
doesn't shock
you
me.
just say it.
You think that would have been a lead-in to talk about, what's the word? Oh, disaster plans or something. She obviously had enough staff and proper staff in place that her business stayed alive while she was gone 10 months. Whether you're in jail or sick, you know. So, but that's just
plan for being in jail or something.
Hear her speech.
I think some of my clients should, though, actually.
Yes.
I don't know what kind of clients y'all have, but I'm an angel. I take angel clients.
Because it says so over your head, Sarah.
That's right. Right.
Angel.
Good thing it's not around her neck.
Everybody, it's Ralphie's birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday, Ralphie.
Oh, Ralphie.
Wait a minute, isn't there a cake or something? Where's the cake?
Isn't he getting old? How old is Ralphie?
How old is it?
Ralphie's 11.
You need to put the birthday hat on Ralphie.
Awesome.
Put the birthday hat on Ralphie.
Yeah, we haven't seen Ralphie for a while. Has he been?
He has gotten very. I think he kind of quit his job.
Here's the birthday cake. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Ralphie.
Blow it out.
Happy birthday, dear Ralphie.
Birthday to you.
We're all in different keys.
Blow it out, buddy.
Blow it out.
Hello.
Uh-oh. Doug Sleater just joined.
Uh-oh.
Oh, that didn't take long.
Ralphie, we're blowing out the Ralphie's blowing out his candles. Candle.
Yeah, it's his birthday today. Ralphie's birthday.
You are not dressed up, Doug.
Can't come in.
Come on, Doug. Put on a costume.
He's got a mustache.
Here.
All right, hang on.
You must have
All right,
heard
so
us
you
talk
also
about
got a scary bookkeeping story. Come on, I know you have them. Don't make me tell my payroll story again.
Millions of them.
Where is it?
All right, I'll go since nobody else is. You've all probably heard this story already. But I had a client call me up, and the first time they came to me, they said they decided to go with somebody else because I was too expensive. So a year or so later, they came back, and I think it was more than a year later, they came back and they said, you know, the bookkeeper we wound up hiring is very good, but in fact, she's so good that she's very busy and she can't pay enough attention to us. So I, at that point actually had since raised my rates, and they were willing to pay them at this point. They just wanted somebody reliable in there doing the job. So I took them on. I started reviewing their books, and I start going through the banking and the reconciliations, and I'm seeing these very even transfers on the bank statement, which when I cross-referenced that to what was in QuickBooks, they were booked to payroll expenses.
Oh, I know where this is going.
And I'm like, well, that's weird. And I asked them about it, and they said, oh, yeah, we have a payroll account, a separate bank account for that, so we just transfer the money in there to cover payroll, and we just, since it's all going to get used for payroll anyway, we just book that to payroll expense. And I said, so you never put the actual payroll checking account on the books? And he says, no. He says, the bookkeeper said we didn't need to. And I'm like, okay, that's what you get for $15 an hour or $20 an hour, whatever they were paying her. So lo and behold, I had to go get all the statements and put a whole year's worth of payroll information on the books for them. And that's probably my most significant scary bookkeeping story. That's probably the most shocking one I've seen to date. Leaving an entire bank account off the books.
Oh, it is common though. I have a couple of clients that do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they said their tax guy said to do it. So I said, because the tax guy does the payroll. So I said, well, if that's what your tax guy says, that's fine, but that's not. He
probably recompiles it in his own system. He doesn't care what's in QuickBooks.
That's my thought too. So I don't really worry about it.
Yeah, most pros don't use. Will basically just re-enter QuickBooks data into their own software to do the taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's
That's
when
the
I asked
old way
client,
to do it.
what do you want your books for? Do you want your books just so you can get a tax return done, or do you want to actually use it to analyze the business? I don't want the clients who just want a tax return done. That's a waste of my time. I want the clients who actually want to use that information, do the books properly, and make decisions based on that information.
Yeah, and grow their business.
Well, Seth, you have to lead them to that point sometimes. I have had bad clients that I've just done what they said, but gently encouraged them and led them. You know, I would throw reports at them whether they wanted to see them or not. And finally, they would come back and start asking questions. I'm like, yeah. You know, then we can...
Right.
Well, talk about scary. You know, what Gina's talking about, I worry about them leaving me for some reason too expensive or whatever, and the next accountant gets hold of the books and goes, well, Sarah Laylaw didn't know what the hell she was doing.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, you know, if I can't control how I want to post,
right,
and maybe that's just me, but
Well, yeah, that does bring up a point. You know, how much investment do you put into your client's books? Sometimes I feel like I put more investment into them than they do, or I am more concerned about it being correct.
Yeah, and your reputation, because that's all we have is our reputation. We don't sell a product like something out of a store. We sell our service, and service businesses have to protect their reputation like gold.
You know what I'm finding is amazingly effective here in exactly the capacity in terms of getting the client more interested in the books is, and I do this more and more consistently now, when I get a new bookkeeping client in the door, of course the first phase is usually to review the books and get everything caught up and cleaned up. Because there's always a mess, and invariably there's going to be some cleanup work you're going to do, because regardless, even if the books are okay, there's going to be things that were done differently than the way we like to do them. So we're always going to want to kind of clean things up in accordance with how we like to do things, maybe clean up the chart of accounts, all that stuff. But once we get there, and once I feel the books are at the point where I'm comfortable with the balance sheet and the P&L, then what I'll do is I'll actually schedule the appointment with the client. And they don't even fully understand what I'm driving at until the moment comes that we actually get into the appointment, but where I will have them log in remotely with me, and I will share my screen with them, and I review their financials with them. And by the time I'm done with that session, it can take an hour to 2 hours, depending on how detailed their chart of accounts is, but they are always so gracious and thankful that I went through that process with them. They consistently tell me how eye-opening it was and how much better they understand, A, the importance of what we're doing for them. I had one guy who was really haggling with me on, I was charging him a flat monthly fee, really simple business. I wanted to charge him $350 a month. He only wanted to pay $300. When I was done with that review, he said, Seth, I have no problem giving you the $350 a month. I'm so impressed with what you're doing. And to me, it's so powerful just to do that. It makes all the difference in the world.
That's awesome. How did you bill out when you took them on to clean up their books? Did you give them an hourly rate? Because usually
I have a formula for that I use. So I base it on $85 an hour for the bookkeeping cleanup work. And the formula that I use, and it just works based on a very rough law of averages, but it always works out. I've ever since I started doing it this way, I have yet to be in a situation where I felt like I had to put in more time than what I got paid for. And
do you have an Excel sheet for it, Seth?
I don't. I'll whip one up real quick, just like scrap paper in Excel. But what I do is for each account, for each month of reconciliation, the assumption is 1 hour. So, and the way that averages out is their main operating account is going to have more. It's going to take perhaps more than an hour to enter and reconcile everything and review it all and do all the back and forth. But then the other ones will be much lighter. So it averages out really nicely when I do it this way. And every time since I started doing it this way, it has worked out. If anything, I probably ended up getting paid, more than I really needed to for the time. But that's where we get into value pricing, like I know Doug is going to say. So, because I have a formula that is based on an hourly rate, and it's based on a number of hours, but that's just to give me a rough idea of what I should charge. And then I hit him with that estimate, and then sometimes I'll pad it a little bit beyond. So in one case, I think I had 8 months worth of reconciliations to clean up, and there were 2 or 3 accounts that had to be entered and reconciled, and based on that, when I did the math, it came to like $2,000, and I just said $2,500 for the 8 months of cleanup, and then we'll figure out an hourly rate, and he was fine with that. So that's how I do it, and it's worked out very well that way.
Perfect.
Well, I always tell my clients that no one's going to care more about your company than you are, and if you get a client that doesn't care more than, if someone that doesn't care more than I do about their company, that's a real red flag, because they're going to basically blame you if anything goes sideways, because they don't want the responsibility.
Right. But again, that's why that review process that I do with the clients has proven to be so powerful. It has taken clients who normally wanted to know nothing about their books. They just wanted to know the books were handled so that they can get a return done when the time came. And it converts those kinds of clients immediately into clients who now they want to talk to me every month. And I love that. I embrace that. That's not
them to be able to invest that hour and a half. That's the hardest thing for me, is that
I haven't had a problem just saying, hey, can we schedule a 1-hour session? I want to go over your books with you. I mean, it's almost like, how can they say no to that? It's their book.
I get no frequently.
I have a scary bookkeeping story that sort of relates to the client not caring about the books, and that was that his bookkeeper, of all things, was his ex-wife. And amazingly, they were living together. Well, I get this call from, I hadn't heard from about 5 months. Done some QuickBooks setup, and he said that he had to fire his ex-wife because she was stealing or embezzling. And so I went down and looked at his books, and he just sort of casually mentioned that, yeah, she was doing crack. And I'm thinking, you're letting your ex-wife, who's on crack cocaine, do your books, and you're surprised you got problems. It's like,
Yeah.
That relationship did not end well, believe me.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
That's funny.
I had one very similar. This was many years ago. It was really the father of a friend of mine who knew I had had some auditing experience, and he didn't know what was wrong, but the books just weren't adding up somehow. And so I gathered his information. I think he was using Quicken. And I remember I actually converted his Quicken data to QuickBooks just so I could work with it. And he had all these spreadsheets that he was using to keep track of stuff. And this was a commercial property management company. So they managed commercial properties. Long story short, his ex-wife, it turned out, while she was working with him, she picked one particular place. It happened to be a pizzeria. And she would collect their rent checks in person and cash them directly against their bank's account, so that the money never touched his books. And it took a while of piecing things together to figure out that consistently it was the same monthly rent amount that was missing from his deposits, and then able to trace that back to the pizzeria. And we were able to get copies of the canceled checks and figure out what she was doing. Here's the kicker. He wasn't doing it to press charges against her or anything like that. He was happy as anything with me that I was able to put that together, because he wanted to use that as leverage in his divorce case.
So sad.
Oh.
I have
Yes.
one.
Sarah?
I have one.
Go.
I had a CPA call me because he wasn't very familiar with QuickBooks, and he said, would you explain this open balance equity account to me? And I said, sure. And I dialed into his account, and I said, how long have you had this tax line? He said, years. He said, every year I just close it out to income. And I said, well, they don't have their money market on the books, and every time they make a contribution into the company, they didn't know where to post it, so that's where they were posting it. So those were all wasn't income, about 40 grand a year.
Oh. So
Yeah, he was a little dead silent after that one. I said, buddy, you can't just fudge 40 grand and not find out where it came from.
I have a good one. It's kind of along the same lines as that. A lot of my stories have to do with not the client being scary, but who's doing their taxes. That's even scarier.
Ooh.
And because I do a lot of QuickBooks work for people who use other CPAs locally here. And they might not use me to do tax, and that's fine, whatever. But this one client, every year, and for 3 years, I've been doing her stuff, and I asked her, and I said, does your client look at your QuickBooks file? Oh, yeah, I send him an accountant's copy. He makes all the changes, which, by the way, she never puts back into her file, but that's another thing.
Of course.
So long story short, what happened is that I went and looked this year because she's actually finally gave in and she wants me to do most everything throughout the year for her. There have been outstanding or deposits in transit since 2011 that total about $15,000 to $20,000. So in other words, one of these years she overstated income because she's just been carrying these deposits in transit, and this accountant has never asked her about it. You know, this tax person
never looked at the bank rec.
No, he's getting the accountant's copy. He's making adjustments for depreciation, and like that's it, and doing the tax return.
Yeah.
Completely ignoring
Because
it.
he's not being paid. He's not being paid to.
And that's freaking scary. That to me is scary.
Well, I know CPAs that do that. I mean, they just take the QuickBooks at face value because they're not getting paid to clean up QuickBooks, and so that's kind of, and I can understand that from, you know, because when you're slammed with tax returns, you're reluctant to be doing non-billable work, you know, especially if the client's not asking for it and doesn't really appreciate it.
Yeah. See, and I think that's the main difference between me and a lot of at least the local CPAs in my area is that I will not do your tax return unless you engage me to review your QuickBooks file, because I do not want to sign and put my name on a return if I don't know where the numbers are coming from. And I just honestly can't see how other CPAs can ethically sign a return without doing that process.
Yeah, I got a QuickBooks file. I think I told you it had a total negative assets on the balance sheet. And so I said, I can't do your tax return, and I don't see how the accountant did the tax return last year because you had negative balances even then. So I don't know what was done, or maybe the accountant just got the income statement, not the balance sheet. But that's kind of risky.
Yeah.
Well, the sole proprietorships are the riskiest because
they don't have to report the balance sheet.
The balance sheet, yeah.
But the funny thing about it is that this person is in such a tight relationship with this tax person, and he's not really doing the best for her business, and it's almost like they treat it almost like a hairdresser, like they do not want to make a change because they're afraid of
the haircut is horrible.
They're afraid of the new haircut they're going to get.
Well, the classic answer you get from a lot of clients when you tell them that something they're doing is terribly wrong is, oh, we've always done it that way. And I love that answer. Oh, well, then it must be okay. You know what? When we go into tax court, we'll just tell the judge, hey, my client's always done it that way, and I'm sure they'll dismiss the case.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you have to talk to them like that in those words, too, to make them understand.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Sarcasm is very effective sometimes in motivating clients. So I had a client years ago.
I'm the queen of the sarcasm, so good.
Really?
Say that.
Really,
so the client called me up, and this was in like August, and he had filed an extension, and he was hoping to get his returns done by September 15th, and this was already mid-August, and he had no books for the prior year. So he wanted me to, put his books together in the space of like 2 weeks for an entire year, because then, the CPA that I work with was going to need the other 2 weeks to review them basically and make sure that the returns got done. So I was very reluctant to take it on because I was already very busy, and he pushed and pushed, and actually got to the point where he asked me to drive to his home at like 10 o'clock one night to meet with him to get all his paperwork and everything. So I very reluctantly agreed to do it, and I'm going through, and he's got statements. As far as I could tell, the statements were all there, but obviously I had to sit and go through them and sort of catalog everything like I do when I get paper from a client. And and then he showed me all these spreadsheets that his wife had put together for cost of goods sold. And I get this, the guy's in the vending machine business, right? So it's all cash, which means they're going from machine to machine and taking the coins out and restocking it, and then going to Costco to buy the supplies to restock it with. And so a lot of the costs are going on an American Express card, but a lot of the revenue is going into bags that sat in his home and frankly never got reported. So really, really interesting business to do the books for. So I had all these spreadsheets apparently indicating other costs that they had incurred based on using the money that was received that was never deposited into the bank to buy more stuff. And so, it was the money was received in cash, and then cost of goods sold were paid for in cash. So we had all these cost of goods sold and no actual revenue. Oh, I mean, some was reported. So he ultimately, as I'm getting all this information from him in his house, it's 10 o'clock at night. I'm exhausted. I'm about to walk out, and he looks at me and says, "So how much is this going to cost?" And I said, "I really have no idea. I have to get into it and go through everything and see what's involved before I can give you an accurate answer to that question." And he's like, "Well, just a ballpark. You know, I'm not going to hold you to it." Those were his exact words. And I said, I don't know. It did look pretty simple for the most part. So I said, I don't know. It looks fairly simple. I said, maybe $1,000, to get the books compiled for a year. And he says, okay, that sounds reasonable. I said, but like I said, I got to go through everything, and as soon as I have a better picture of it, I'll let you know a more accurate quote. So that night, I race back home to Burbank. I meet with my bookkeeper in downtown Burbank so that I could immediately put the stuff in her hands so she could get started doing the work. And I said, I want you to spend an hour at first cataloging everything, seeing what the scope is, and tell me how many hours you think it's going to take to get the job done. And so she does, and she comes back to me, and based on what she told me, experience has told me, always double what they say, right? And so based on that, I went back to the client. Now, mind you, this is less than 24 hours later, and I sent an email to the client saying, hey, we did have a chance to go through everything, and it's looking like it's going to be closer to 2,000 rather than 1,000. Now, you tell me if you think that's unreasonable. Less than 24 hours later, after having put him on very clear notice that I really couldn't give an accurate estimate, and him specifically telling me he's not going to hold me to it, I get a phone call from him flying off the handle. When I bring my car to the service station and they give me an estimate, they stick to the estimate. And I said, you told me yourself you're not going to hold me to it. Now you're holding me to it. And at that point I said, you know what? I said, I'll bring your paperwork back to you. I'm out. I'm not doing this project. And he's like, oh, now I've lost another day. And so he says, look, I'll agree to do it for $1,500. And I reluctantly agreed to do it for the $1,500. Sure enough, as we dig in, there's missing statements. I can't get cooperation from him. He's saying, oh, why do you need this? We gave you everything in the spreadsheets, right? That's what made me think of it as he wants me to rely on the stuff that they made up rather than the actual documents that they provided, coupled with the missing documents that were there. The whole thing was such a disaster.
He didn't want it right. Yeah.
It was very obvious in the end that he didn't want to report all his income. He was trying to hide as much income as possible because it's all cash, and then as much cost of goods sold as possible. He wanted to get onto the books so that he didn't have to pay any taxes. Fortunately, the guy moved out of Los Angeles. I'm happy to never see the guy again.
Ooh.
That was where I learned my lesson, though, about giving quotes. If I ever had that to do again, I would absolutely refuse, because that wasn't the first time that happened, and it wasn't the last, where somebody says, oh, I'm not going to hold you to it, but they always hold you. They always say they're not going to hold you to it, and they always hold you to it. So you got to be so careful giving a quote. And based on that, recently I had a client who I'd been billing hourly come to me, and they wanted to talk about doing a flat rate. And I jacked that flat rate way up, because I really didn't want to do the flat rate because I know how that goes. And if I'm going to do a flat rate, I want to make sure there's more than enough in there to cover, regardless of how much work I have to do. And at the end, when I told them what I wanted to charge them in terms of a flat rate, they decided to stick with the hourly.
Wow. Yeah, I'm finding I have a flat rate with a new client as well, and there's always a lot more involved, it seems, than what they present at first once you get into it.
With a new client, I've had my clients a long time. When I flipped to a flat rate, I was able to do 4 or 5 year averages, and make sure that
it's the right rate
towards the future. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, this job that I had last week, it was a flat rate, and it wasn't the hours; it was when the hours were that trashed me. So,
yeah, you just have to be careful. You have to be very careful quoting a flat rate. That's why the whole concept of value pricing really worries me, especially when people who frankly aren't experienced enough to know how to charge for their services start getting into trying to do that. Value pricing can work out great if you structure it such that you're getting paid so well and you can really scale it so that you're spending less and less time as time goes on. And then the idea is you're charging them the same rate because they're paying the same for the services you provide, but you're able to scale it by getting more and more efficient while charging the same rate, so that in theory the time you have to put in is less and less as time goes on. That's the way value pricing works, but it's very hard to do that and to do it effectively. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Where's your costume?
Where?
I know. I need to put one on. How did you guys do that? I've been watching this whole time.
We
Move
went.
your mouse to the left and look for the little mad blonde icon. It's like a gold icon.
The gold one.
I actually had to go to a store to buy this wig.
Joanne's is not a virtual costume like ours are.
This was a whopping $5. Can you believe
I like it. It's
Kelly,
so huge.
Man looks like the Grateful Dead on steroids today. With the skull face and the,
It wasn't a skull, it was a scary clown.
Scary.
Whoa, stop doing that. I told you you're corrupting the angel.
Wait, do it again. Do it again. I missed it. One more time.
La 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 la.
Oh, my goodness.
Now
That's Joanne's #1 client.
Where's the sound effect?
What's the sound effect?
Ooh, I like that.
Who makes the sound effect?
Where'd you get that cat?
The T-sheet.
He's right next to the dog. I figured it out. I'm having a tough tech day today. One of those days. These have been cracking me up over here, listening to all of them, because obviously I'm not.
Joanne just tweeted her picture.
Oh, of her hangout?
Yeah.
Did you use the hashtag SOBSMB?
Oh, I don't think so. I think I did ABO or something like that. Look at Cosmo wants to say hi to everybody.
Oh, I love his hat.
There's a new sheriff in town. He loves.
What's his or her name?
Oh, she's got a little dog too.
It's his name is Cosmo.
Cosmo.
Hi, Cosmo.
He's adorable.
Thank you. He's just sitting here saying.
We sort of cut you off. You were starting to tell us how you were watching us.
Oh, well, so I've never been an accountant, and so I've never had personal horror stories, but I know so many small business owners that do the things that you guys are talking about, and now knowing so much more about the accounting industry, I was telling Jan the other day that the more I learn, the more I'm like, holy crap, my friends that are small business owners do not, they need better accountants. I need to hook them up with you guys, because I don't know who's telling them how to do their books, but some of the things I'm realizing, I'm like, there's no way that's legal, or at least cause a nightmare for their bookkeeper when they do finally get their fingers in there. So it's been interesting to hear your take.
Like 90 hours and no overtime, things like that?
Yes.
One of the really scary things about the bookkeeping profession is there's this perception out there that it's really easy, that anyone can get in there and start doing bookkeeping. And I'll give you a case study where a good friend of mine, who I know just strictly on a personal level, she's a writer, and at one point, this was a few years back, I guess she was looking to see if there were ways she could make extra money on the side, and in a phone conversation we had, she actually said to me, do you think maybe I could just go out and get QuickBooks and start doing some bookkeeping on the side? And, I mean, to us that sounds really funny, but the reality is there's a lot of people out there with that perception that they can just go buy QuickBooks and just, you can figure out how to fill out a check form and, oh, this is easy, so and I have a tweet that I put out there based on that, not based on my friend, but based on that sort of thinking in general, where, I actually put it out there once in a while. It always gets a lot of retweets, where I say, just because somebody buys QuickBooks doesn't mean they know how to keep your books.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, even
that's where their value for you comes in, and they didn't realize that value until you sit down and do what you do, Seth, and go through the books with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
My niece just had a baby. And she's like, how long would I have to come over and learn what you're doing so that I could stay at home?
Well,
Well, Sarah, there's a perfect answer to that question. You actually describe it in terms of how many years you've been doing this for, and tell her it would take that many years.
No, a day.
1,000 hours.
Come on.
Hey, Doug.
How hard is it?
We've been talking about the monthly fee and value pricing. What input do you have on that?
Don't get him going.
I don't want to
That little puppy over there is been really quiet.
I've just been taking notes. No, the whole value pricing thing to me is it's not an either or situation. I'm right in the middle of the people who say throw away all timesheets because they're useless. I don't quite see why they say that. And so actually that's what we're going to have Ron Baker come defend his perspective at our conference. He and Ed Kless are going to do a value pricing session, and actually a pre-conference session on it too.
I better not let T-sheets into that one.
Yeah.
They're saying throw away T-sheets. I would never throw away T-sheets.
T-sheets works for value billing too. You still need job, for job costing purposes. So don't worry. Either way.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
that's how we use T-sheets to see if we really valued or priced it well, to see if we're losing money or not making money on that. So we absolutely use T-sheets specifically for that.
Yeah.
Love it.
I have employees that slow down.
Say that you should throw away the timesheet and ignore time. It takes what it takes. The whole idea is that you don't want to spend the time keeping time. But Doug, go ahead, continue.
Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, it's all about, like, Rhonda's in the contracting business, and her husband goes out and bids jobs when they to see if they can get the bid, and then his competitive environment is he has to be the lowest bidder or somewhere reasonable to get a job. Well, how does he know what his costs are? How does he know what to bid so that he'll continue to make a profit? That's the whole point that I think you're all making, and I agree with it.
Well, and I guess the theory is if you really wanted to go all in with value pricing, you would have to get all your vendors to get on board with that and tell them, you give me a flat quote so I know what it's going to cost me.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, most of our vendors are flat fee. I suppose even the utility bill and the rent and all that, that's, those costs.
What kind of vendors are you talking about? Subs?
Yeah, if you mean subs, that's different.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about in the example you gave in the construction model where I have subs. I'm going to hire a carpenter to do all the framing for the home I'm building, right? And so normally the carpenter's going to come at me with a quote based on how many hours, based on how many square feet of the property and all the other parameters that go into their calculation. So value pricing says in order for that to work, I think, in theory, is that I would have to go back to my carpenter contractor and say, hey, I need you to give me a value pricing quote. I need a flat quote on this so that I can give a flat quote. In other words, it has to trickle all the way down. Otherwise, if I've got somebody coming to me based on hours giving me a quote and I'm trying to flat price it and competing with other people to be able to be competitive and get that bid, that's where it gets really challenging.
Well, I think a lot of the subs even will do that for the but it's inevitable that you'll get scope creep in any job that happens. So when we go in as bookkeepers or accountants with some project to do, it's inevitable that we're going to get into the project and find that we didn't scope it right. Or the client wasn't fully honest with us, and we do what needs to be done to achieve the result, and sometimes that's more than what we thought going in. So anyway, that's it's certainly an argument towards hourly billing, but if we only sell by the hour, clients are allergic to that. I don't want back to the construction guy. He doesn't want his guys his subs to just say, okay, come and work until you're done. He wants the framer to say, okay, well, this is my estimate, and this is what I'm willing to go for.
It's kind of like a blank check.
Yeah.
But so this goes back to where, as the consultant who's trying to do value pricing, you have to, in a sense, sell the client on the value. I have to, and what I found works for our business in particular as accountants is, like I said, when I walk the client through that review process, that's where they begin to see more than ever before the value, and that's why I brought up that story earlier, because it's a perfect example of where I value priced it, and we were haggling back and forth, but once I walked him through that process, he had no problem coming up to what I wanted to charge him. It was almost like I probably could have charged him more. So. That's the art of value pricing, is being able to convince the client that they're getting something more for your expertise and experience and everything that you bring to the table, and so therefore it's worth more than what they might pay somebody else for the same work. I think that's the misnomer, is that we think of value pricing as a set price for the services delivered, and that's not really what it is, because if I look at it that way, then it doesn't matter if I have a year of experience or 30 years of experience. The end product is a set of books, and so it should cost the same. And that's not true. It should cost a lot more to have somebody with 30 years of experience doing it, because with that experience comes more accuracy, more reliability, and better feedback based on that information.
And just simple, been there, done that. But you have to convince your client that he needs that value.
Well,
That's the hard part.
what I found one of the challenges is, I think we talked about this earlier, is that other service providers, like say you go to a restaurant and you get a haircut, you've got a pretty good sense of whether you get value or not, but a lot of clients don't have a frame of reference to know if they're getting good value for accounting information. So if they don't have a frame of reference, they're probably going to gravitate towards picking the cheapest.
And what their frame of reference tends to be the contractor, Mr. Joe Contractor we're talking about. He has another buddy that's a contractor, and they talk between each other and say, hey, I'm only paying $500 a month for my bookkeeping. What are you paying?
Well, that's bookkeeping. See, I go at it at a different angle. I don't quote by month, I quote by year. And I say, here's what I'll charge you to take care of you for a year. The bookkeeping's just part of that. So I have to explain that this QuickBooks and this keeping your checkbook up and all that is just a part of handling your finances, being available, making sure you get good financial statements. That I come out with a different a different way to explain it, to get them out of that mindset that well, how many hours are you working for a month? And the big thing is, I'm keeping you in compliance, and I'm going to keep you out of jail. I'm going to make sure that you have hourly employees instead of salary when they're not exempt from overtime. I'm going to make sure that your invoices are worded properly. It's more than just crunching numbers.
Well, right, we all know that, but and again, it goes back to like what I think Dennis was saying. It's context, because different people are going to care about different things. And I'll give you an example. I have a client. I've had many clients being in Los Angeles over the years in the entertainment industry, and so one in particular stands out in my mind. Who, when she would get her hair done, she would spend like $1,000 because she cares about having the highest quality hair color products and the highest quality of everything, because that matters to her, because she's going on film, right? She's going on the big screen. Whereas my wife, I would be beside myself if she spent that kind of money to get her hair done, because it's context, right? So
I spent $10.
So some clients are going to really care. The client I had a few years back, which was run by two brothers. One was a Harvard grad, one went to Berkeley, and they both had degrees in finance or related areas. They cared a lot about the numbers. They really wanted cash flow projections. They wanted to meet every month and go over these numbers and see, right? It all depends on who the client is and what they care about, and then whether or not you can convince them to care about what you think they should care about. And that's and like I said, I'll keep going back to it. Going through that review process, nailing the client down, and saying you have to go through this process with me at least once, it makes all the difference. They start to understand the value in ways they never did before.
Well, in a perfect world, they would have taken SBA classes or SCORE classes before they even started their business, so they'd have some appreciation of the value of financial information.
Let's be honest, they're not going to go take SCORE classes based on our suggestions.
They're not. I mean, people just sort of jump in, and start spending money, and it's kind of amazing how much, your risking like personal savings or your rate in your 401k or whatever to kind of make a flyer on this particular business that you have no experience in, or
right.
You know.
And going back to Sarah's point, to impress upon them that, we're going to keep them out of jail, I think a lot of clients would probably like snub their noses at that, like, oh, I'm not worried about that. But if you want to hit them where it really counts, and this goes to a question that's in the chat, and I don't know if the person asking wants to remain anonymous about it, so I'm not going to mention who, but there's a question here about how a client has a 28-page chart of accounts, and how do we convince the client to consolidate that? And you hit them in the pocketbook, and not to manipulate them, but to be realistic about it. A 28-page long chart of accounts equals a lot more accounting costs to keep track of all of that. And it equals a lot more difficulty trying to read and interpret those financial statements because they're so overly stacked with extra detail that's not necessary. And so you explain to them that it's costing them a you-know-what load more money because of the way it's structured, and you could save them a bundle by consolidating it, making it easier to read and making it easier to do the bookkeeping. That's where the client's going to start listening, is when you hit them in the pocketbook. That's where people always care.
What I tell them is that there's a cost to maintaining and generating information, and if it's not required by the agencies like the IRS or the state, and it's not helping you make business decisions, then why do it? It's like there has to be the benefit of the information obtained by having all those costs or information has to be better than what it's actually costing you to maintain or generate that information.
Absolutely.
I think
Is there a point though where it's just a client that isn't getting it and isn't going to get it and maybe just isn't worth your time? Your time is better spent elsewhere. Is there a threshold that you guys eventually like, this person's just never going to be right for my business?
Well, I think it's going to be different each time. I don't think there's a set answer for that. I think each client is different, their needs are different, and I think like for us, we had standard monthly fees based on level of service they picked, and invariably they have certain requirements that aren't even in that mix, which throws that number out of the door. And we're finding that, like right now we have a talent agency, a small one that we've been working with. Once we got on the books, I'm like, oh, ye gods, they're not making enough money for much of us. But we came in under the price they were paying for an assistant and a bookkeeper, and but they took the low end price, which was my mistake, letting them pick. Because now we're like looking at the hours we're running with them, and I came back to them yesterday after doing 2 months of it, and because it's really, while we'll be less than what they were paying for those combined services, it's almost double what they had picked, and so we're having like headache kind of conversations right now. Yeah. And I think this is such an important topic, Seth, that maybe we update each week if there's some new input on this, because I think this is where we get, at least for us, this is where we can get stuck, and then you have that uncomfortable conversation with the client coming back to them. I don't like coming back to them now because then it makes us look like we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah. Well, I'll share with you a story that's not so scary along these lines, because years ago, I have the very same CPA who does my tax returns has been a mentor of mine in many ways and in probably practically every area of my life. He's a guy who's been doing this for a long, long time. He's a VP of taxation at a big CPA firm, and he's been doing it for like 30 years. So he's got the business experience, and he's also got personal experience that I really look up to on many levels. So this is the guy, all that was to say, this is the guy I go to for guidance on almost anything, especially business related. Right. And I said to him, years ago I went to him and I said, you know what, I'm overwhelmed. I'm being pulled in too many different directions. I have all these clients and I'm busy all the time. I'm working too hard and I'm not making enough money to justify the amount of energy and effort that I'm putting out there. And what he told me was so simple that I overlooked it, and so obvious that I didn't see it. Often the best place to hide something is right in front of someone. So he said to me, he said, Seth, it's basic supply and demand. He said, what you're describing is the demand for your time has increased substantially. And so you have to shorten the supply by raising the price. That's what it comes down to. When I am in more demand or when I am busier than I want to be, it's time to raise my rates. And when a client is more difficult than I really care to deal with, then it's time to raise my rates. And one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to get compensated fairly for, frankly, having to deal with a difficult client, or they're going to say, forget it, I don't want to pay that much, and they're going to walk away, which is going to be probably better for both of us in the long run. and sometimes it does reach a point where, you want to hear something funny? I have one client who, it was so difficult, and we were butting heads so badly. I mean, at one point, this had never happened in my entire career. In a remote call, we got into essentially a shouting match where we were screaming at each other. I've never in my entire career had this happen with any other client. It came to this point with this client because the client frustrated me so. And finally, after that call, I sent her one warning. I said, if it ever comes to this again, we are done. I am not willing to work with a client where it gets to that point. It's not worth it. It's better for both of us to walk away. And she came back to me and said, oh, that's unreasonable. I've invested too much time and money with you. And she had all these reasons why I needed to continue working with her. So I jacked up the rates. I said, okay, going forward, and this is a client where, I have them sign up on my site. I have them so they pay the full rate. There's no discounts, and I make sure the client always pays up front. And it came to the point where eventually I went back again and I said, you know what? We're still having problems. It's not working. I think you're better off with somebody else where you'll be happier. And quite frankly, I don't enjoy the process of working with you because it's not a cooperative and constructive process. It's very negative, and I don't want to. Either one of us should be subjected to that kind of a working relationship. And again, she comes back and says, same nonsense. I've invested too much time and money with you, blah, blah, blah. And I ignored her after that. I sought the guidance of the mentors that I go to on these things, and they said, you've let her know. You don't want to work with her anymore. Just stop responding. And I did. And do you know what the client went and did? She went onto my site and paid for a session. So, almost refunded the money, but I didn't. At that point, I said, fine, if she wants me that badly, I'll do it. But to go back to Kelly's question, I think there comes, the best way to do it is to jack up your rates and either make it worth your while by doing that or make them want to walk away. To me, that's always better to have them walk away by their choice rather than me cutting off the engagement by actually cutting ties with them. But sometimes you just have to. Sometimes it's just not worth it anymore.
Yeah, it's like a
subject for a hang-up is firing clients and
right. Because all of us have used PETA fees.
Yeah, I'm good at that.
PETA fees because the reputation in town might be, she's just too expensive, and when you really aren't that expensive. So yeah, it's a tight one.
This goes back to an interesting topic that came up in the ABO group on Facebook this week, Sarah, because we were talking about rates in several of the threads this week, and somebody brought up the point, oh, I could never charge that in my area. And so along the same lines of whatever reputation you might have in your area, as soon as I hear that kind of language, my thinking is we're forgetting that it doesn't matter what's going on in your area because we have social media and the related opportunity to reach clients anywhere. Right? So if I can't get the clients that I want in my area, fine. Go out, use social media, go attract clients in major cities. So who cares what your reputation is? I mean, obviously you want to manage the reputation and have the best reputation you can have, but again, I wouldn't sweat it too much if you're worried about people. And there's a great response to that, which is, yes, I am more expensive than others in my area, and there's a reason for that. You get what you pay for.
Maybe that's why my DC client thinks I'm so great.
I have a client, I shared this on Facebook this week, I have a client who's flying me to Vegas next month to do work on their stuff. I'm sure there's plenty of capable accountants in Las Vegas who could help them, but they wanted me because they saw what I had out there on social media and they have confidence that I can do the job and do it well, and maybe better than anybody else.
Well, plus one benefit of expanding your horizons, you can pick clients that are better fits for you. I mean, especially if you like to do stuff online, and you can go in and have pick better clients. You've expanded your client pool potentially, rather than stuck with these crummy clients that are local that want to pay market rates in a bigger city.
That's another point, Dennis. Maybe a client isn't good for you, but is good for one of your peers. Exactly. I have another pro advisor that I work with. If I'm done with a client, I'll pass them on to her. But I will call her and let her know what issue.
If I suggest a client to another accountant, the first thing I get is,
what's wrong with them?
You don't want them? I don't want them.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, as you start out,
I thought I was your friend.
Friend of me.
when you start out, you pick lousy, you kind of get your experience with lousy clients that no one else wants, and then you kind of graduate.
Right.
Like baseball players, you start the minors, then you work your way up.
Mm-hmm. Tell that to new bookkeepers and new accountants all the time.
Yeah.
You tell them you have to be selectful, and they'll go, but I'll starve. And I go, well, yeah, I remember when I first started. You just sort of take what you can get.
Yeah.
Then you build it up, and then you can start. That's a happy day when you fire that first one.
But that's where the whole pricing model actually balances in a very organic way, because the newer people with less experience have to come in at a lower rate. They have to gain the experience. It's funny, when I started in this business, because I had experience in previous businesses, particularly working on Wall Street as a stockbroker, I had taken a lot of what I learned in that experience and brought it into here. And one of the principles that I remember being very conscious of when I got into the accounting business was, especially when I went out on my own, was that you're probably going to burn through your first 10 clients before you have enough experience gained to actually be able to keep them, because you're going to make mistakes, you're going to screw things up, and your lack of experience is going to just cause you to fall flat on your face, and that's okay. Just be prepared that you're going to burn through probably your first 10 clients before you really, get the experience that you need to know how to take care of things properly.
Those
and
are
if you
guinea
go into
pig clients.
What?
Those are guinea pig clients.
Yeah.
It's the nature of things. And so what happens is the clients who want to spend less money, they get what they pay for. They get the less experienced bookkeeper who's going to make the mistakes, so they get to save money in the short term. That's why on my accounting consulting page on my website, it says, we're the ones you hire to clean up the mess left behind by that $25 an hour bookkeeper you tried to cut costs with. And it's a little harsh of a thing to say, but I do it obviously to be provocative and to get people's attention and get them to want to read on. But there's a lot of truth to that. So when we get into the value pricing conversation later, and I can't wait to release Course 7 at the School of Bookkeeping, because the first whole section talks about all this kind of stuff. Here's my take on value pricing and how to approach it. It's not so much, I think the mistake we make is we look at it in terms of the services and the value of what we're providing, right? My plan is to go out there and introduce a new variation on this theme. I'm frankly calling it power pricing, and it's going to be based on saying, you know what, I want to put the power of pricing back into the hands of the consultant, because I think value pricing puts too much power into the hands of the client. And by doing that, what I want to go out there and say is you have to ask yourself, when you're deciding how to price your services, what's it going to take you to get out of bed in the morning and go do the best damn job you can do? That's how I look at it. And so I was talking with somebody on the phone the other day about this, and I said, if somebody calls me up and says, I want a one-on-one training with you, but I want to pay $75 an hour for it, I'm kind of like, I think I'm going to go back to sleep. When they come and they say, you know what, I want to pay your $185 an hour that you charge for a single hour, then I'm excited. Then I'm out of bed and I'm in the shower and I'm getting ready, because now I'm excited to do the best job I can for you, because I'm getting paid very well for it. I'm getting paid what I really feel good about getting paid for it. And that's when everybody wins, is because I'm getting paid really well for what I'm doing. In response to that, I'm feeling so good about it, I'm going to do the best job I can. If I'm resentful because I'm not getting paid well, or in my perception I'm not getting paid well, I'm not going to do a good job. No matter how professional I think I can be, I'm not going to do a good job.
Another benefit is they're more likely to take your advice if they're paying $185 versus $75 an hour.
True.
That's true too.
Yeah. What was that, Dennis? I missed that.
I said they're more likely to take your advice if they're paying you $185 as opposed to paying you $75 an hour.
That's a great point.
They value you more.
That's a great point. I mean, and that number came specifically from a phone call I got from somebody who was in Florida who wanted to do a remote session with me, and she said, I can get somebody to come here and do it in person for $75 an hour. And I said, call them.
Right.
I said, go call them. That's great. I'm not that guy. I'm not going to do it in person, and I'm not going to do it for $75 an hour. There's a difference. And the way I try and explain the value is I tell them, frankly, doing it remotely, first of all, it's like I'm right there with you looking over your shoulder because I can see your screen, and secondly, I can record the session, which I could never do effectively in person. I mean, even if I brought my Sony camera, it's not going to come out the same as actually recording the screen action. So to me, that's where the major value is in the training services that I offer, is that I record the session so you can review that session afterwards. You don't have to take notes, so you can be more focused during the live session. And so, again, that's where, when we talk about value pricing, that's where I show the value, is in what you get to take away with you after the fact. So
what people don't appreciate is that the most expensive accounts charge at least per hour. You're going to save on the front end, but you're going to lose probably 3 times as much on the back end if they screw up your books or screw up your taxes. So it's like, I can't afford to pay to have it done right the first time, but I can afford to pay twice as much to have someone come and fix it.
Well, and that's why, and this is a great note to end on, we love that expression that says, if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, see what happens when you hire an amateur.
Yeah, I'm putting that back on my website. That used to be front and center when you came into my website, and then I sort of like, well, and then I thought, no, if they don't believe that, I don't want them. If it scares them off, good.
Yeah, Gina, we'll see you at 2:30 today, Pacific, 5:30 Eastern?
Yes, yes. Our subjects today are data mining, and Linda's going to share an Excel sheet with us on the advanced certification.
Oh, okay. And then we go trick-or-treating.
And then we go trick-or-treating.
Bring your candy.
That's right. Penny's going to be Tigger.
All right.
Awesome. Can't wait.
You can't get candy if you're an adult unless you bring your kid, right?
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice weekend.